First of all, thank you for your great introduction. And thank you for inviting me to have a workshop with TDSW. Actually, when I'm studying TouchDesigner, I used a lot of your workshops to study. So I was really happy when you guys invited me. Yeah, so to talk a little bit about myself first, as already told in the introduction, I'm a media artist, and I also do TouchDesigner tutorials and workshops. I'm originally from Germany, where I lived in Berlin until I was 19 years old, and then I moved to Seoul, South Korea, and I have been living there ever since. So it's been around 6 years now. And yeah, so the tutorials and workshops I do usually are mostly in Korean, and I'm kind of actively trying to grow our local TouchDesigner community. So for today, I'm going to talk about data visualization in TouchDesigner and how we can create data visualization in TouchDesigner. And this workshop will kind of be split into two halves. So in the first part of the project, we're going to talk about more theoretical stuff on how to approach creating data visualizations. And then in the second half, I will kind of go through how I create data visualizations in TouchDesigner. So yeah, let's start. So first of all, to kind of give you an overview of why I'm doing this workshop or how I'm approaching this workshop. Last year, I did this teamwork called 2020 Monolith with two other Korean artists. And this is a 2-channel video representing, on one hand, data visualization about COVID-19 cases in the United States by Reize. And on the other hand, there's this creative interpretation about the data. The idea behind this project was just as we were experiencing the pandemic, there were a lot of news about racism, especially last year. Black Lives Matter was like really huge in the beginning of the pandemic. Then there were all these news about how time feels super weird in the pandemic since everyone is in lockdown and nobody really goes outside. And then all this news about suicide rates like rising and domestic violence becoming more frequent because people can't leave their homes. And then also recently the problem with Asian hate being really heavily talked about in the media. And for this project, we kind of wanted to show how the pandemic, what effect the pandemic has on us, like culturally and socially. And we were looking at a lot of different data from all kinds of resources, and then like mobility data from Google, like how much do people move, and then also like Twitter trends, and also a lot of news articles or anecdotal just data. And we're just thinking about, okay, how can we express that, wow, what we're experiencing right now is real, and at the same time, what we're experiencing right now is going to have a huge impact on our lives in the future. So I came across this data set by The Atlantic. They have this COVID tracking project, and they have a data set that is organized by race and ethnicity in the United States. Maybe let me show you. I actually didn't open this. Yeah, so, and what they found is that nationwide, Black people have died at a 1.4 times the rate of white people. So this data like clearly shows all this inequality and all these problems that were kind of amplified by COVID-19, that they existed before, but we kind of were able to ignore because we're leading our very busy lives. But now, because of the pandemic, all these problems that we could ignore before were kind of becoming very, very real and very clear. And so I decided, okay, this would be a great way to show that COVID actually has an impact on our lives. Kind of black and white, like, wow, this is really happening. And then on the other hand, like on the other side, you can see like a more creative interpretation of this data. So this is a monolith that first of all stands like just normally there, and then as time goes by, it kind of starts leaning to one side until it nearly falls over in the end. And it was kind of, we kind of used it to show that, that maybe what really matters in our lives as well in the time of a prolonged pandemic, it's not just how am I going to survive by myself, but what does this impact have on all of us, and just really show, okay, we're going through a shift right now. And the reason for actually choosing a monolith is because when you look up the word monolith, it has two meanings, one being just like a huge, large stone structure. But the other meaning is monolith is a large and impersonal political, corporate, or social structure regarded as interactively invisible and uniform. So I thought it was a great way to visualize this message. So, but the reason I'm talking about this project, looking back now, nearly 1 year later, I feel like the data visualization part was not maybe done the best. It could have been maybe done better. So yeah, there's not enough context in this data visualization for the viewer to really understand what they're looking at just one glance. But at the same time, there's maybe too much data at once that is being presented, since this is also not static, it changes over time. So I was kind of like, okay, how do I create better data visualizations, therefore better artworks? Like, what can I do to improve? And I kind of decided to start at the beginning, like, yeah, just start at the beginning. Okay, I'm gonna just learn how to do data visualizations really from the basics. And yeah, that's what I'm gonna share with you today. So our content is kind of like this. We're just first gonna talk about, okay, what is data visualization? How do I find data sets? How do I use data sets? What kind of data is there? Then how to process data. Then on the next step, how to visually encode data. And then also some techniques for visualization data in TouchDesigner. And then last but not least, we're going to do some hands-on visualization. So what is data visualization? Data visualization is an interdisciplinary field that deals with the graphic representation of data, says Wikipedia. So yeah, what does it mean? Why do we need that? Looking at these A and B, this text and this image, I think you can clearly feel which one is easier to read, which one is faster to read. So the text and this image, they have completely the same information, but the image very, very fast, we can understand, okay, what's going on. And it probably will also stay in our memory a lot longer than reading through this text and then you immediately forget again, okay, what did I just read? So that's why we do data visualization. And then there are lots of different types of data visualization. There's actually this data viz project. You can view it datavizproject.com, where they have all these different kinds of data visualization there are organized on one page, which is really great inspiration if you have no idea, okay, what should I do? And you can actually also click on these and get some more information about the type of visualization. And then even they have some examples at the bottom of the page. So this is really a great resource to check out. But then I was like, okay, I know how to create visuals like that. I feel like that's not that difficult, but how do I create visuals that are really beautiful, like those really great works that you're just like, wow, like how did they think about something like that? So yeah, what I figured out or studying or found is these like 4 criteria for beauty in the context of data visualization. So number 1 is the visualization should be novel. So the visualization should provide a fresh look at the data, or the format should be something very interesting and should be something really exciting that results in a kind of new level of understanding that maybe we didn't even think about at first. And the thing about novelty, though, is we can't really achieve novelty just by saying, okay, I really want to have this visual, I really want something to be novel right now. Novelty is kind of more achieved as a byproduct of making something that's really great. So in this case, in creating a data visualization that is really effective. And then secondly, the data visualization should be informative, even though I guess this point is arguable. So usually data visualization should provide some new information that should be very easy to read. And if that's not really happening, I guess you could say that the data visualization has failed and what its purpose was originally. But yeah, like I said, and I think this is arguable because some people, when they do data visualization, they don't really care about actually giving some new insight to the data. They're more focused just on the aesthetics of data visualization. So depends on your viewpoint. And then as a third point, the data visualization should be efficient. So it should give access to some information, straightforward and like as straightforward as possible, without having too much information, but also not lose too much complexity of the data, but still be easy to read and fun to watch. So efficiency is also important. And then lastly, aesthetic. So of course, the graphical construction, what color you choose, how thick your lines are or whatever, of course, makes a data visualization beautiful. But this is not really the most important thing. The message, I think, is a little bit more important than the aesthetic itself. So to show you a great example, which I personally really liked, is this Drowning in Plastic website by Reuters Graphics, where they're visualizing how many plastic bottles we buy or consume in this really cool animation, which shows how many bottles you were sold just when I opened the page. But also when you scroll down, you have more visuals. So this is every hour, and then every day, and then within 1 month. And then a full year, which is even bigger. And then like the past 10 years, which is like super huge. And it's just really easy to understand and has a really great impact. And it's also aesthetically like pleasing. So I think that this data visualization actually really ticks all the boxes. Is also novel because I think nobody ever really thought about, okay, how many plastic bottles do we consume every day or in a year? So I think that's a really great example. And then next, so the usual process for data visualization is first, we need some kind of data set, or we need to find a data set, or we maybe already have one, or we need to create one. And then we need to process this data, figure out what's most important about this data set, maybe prepare it for use in TouchDesigner or another visualization program. And then we need to visually encode the data, so give it using attributes like color or dimension. And then last but not least, create the visualization itself. So during the first step, finding data, there's actually kind of 2 points you can start at. So maybe you have an idea in your head, you have a question, and then you want to find data accordingly to that question, then you can do that. Or you could also just say, okay, I want to try making data visualization. I'm just going to find any data set that I think is interesting and then create a question around that data. So a few places to look for data is, for example, Google's data set search, which looks like that. It's basically Google, but it's you can specifically search for data and it will show you data from around the web that you can find. For example, if I type in coronavirus without anything else behind that, we can see all these different pages that have information about coronavirus, or they have data about the coronavirus. and you can gain access to this by going to the website, or sometimes you can actually find a link right here. Then next, there's this website called kaggle.com, and they have also a range of data sets, which are, there are a lot of really interesting, like fun data sets on here. So maybe if you're like, okay, I want to try making something, but I have no idea what data to use, you can just look around here and maybe find something that you think is interesting or cool or fun. And then you could also use external APIs from maybe Twitter, for example, and extract data that you want. And then you could also create your own data set, of course. So after we have some data, we kind of need to make sense of that data. Like, what is this data telling us? Why is this data important? What do you want to express with this data? Just thinking about that and kind of formulating a question around that data is, I think, really important to successfully creating a data visualization. So for this workshop, the data I used is by the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I actually found this data set also on kaggle.com. And there's actually two data sets, one about MoMA's artists and one about the artworks in the MoMA. But I am using today the artist data set. And in this artist data set, it contains 15,091 records representing all the artists who have work in MoMA's collection. And this data set also has some metadata about each artist. For example, their name, their nationality, and gender, and birth year and death year. So I thought this data was kind of interesting. So I choose that data. And then I formulated a question around this data. So immediately when I saw the data, I was like, okay, I want to know how many female artists have work in MoMA's collections. And then we already come to our second stage, processing the data. We need to find a way to process our data or to prepare our data to work best with what we're trying to tell. So what kind of data set do we need from this data? Do we need all the data points they have? Do we only need some of them to visualize our question or what we're trying to tell? So there are quite a few ways in TouchDesigner itself, right, on processing data. For example, we can use, first of all, the file in that to call files, text files or data files. We can also call text and data files as well with the text stat, even though that's not really the main purpose of the text stat. The text stat is more for editing free-form multi-line text or writing scripts or GLSL shaders or nodes or whatever. But you can also call data with the text stat. And then we also have the table dat, of course, which lets you create data tables and also call data tables from your PC or from the web. And it really depends on what you're going to do with your data. It really depends what kind of operators you're going to use in TouchDesigner. But you're maybe probably not going to need all of the DATs that there are in TouchDesigner, but I just want to show you all these stats that you could use for working with your data and optimizing your data. So you know when you need your own, when you're creating your own visual, so you know, okay, this operator is something I can use. Maybe I'll find it later just from seeing it today once. So there's a select that, which you will probably use a lot. So with the select that, you can you can fetch any dat from any location in your project. And you can also, in case of a table, select rows and columns with the select that. And you can select rows and columns depending on name or index or value or even condition. So something you could use with the select that is pattern matching, and select out specific data using pattern matching. For example, you could use the star to match any sequence of characters, or maybe use this. Let me find, I forgot what the name is. I wrote it down. I can't find the name anymore. Anyway, you can use this symbol to maybe not match certain characters. And there are a lot of other ways you can pattern match as well, but these two, I think, you will use the most or are the most used. Then we have a insert that. So you can insert new rows and new columns into an existing table. You can use the transpose that to change rows into columns or vice versa. And then use the substitute that, for example, for changing information in your cells. So saying, okay, all capital A's are going to be now small a's, for example. And then you can also change the order of your table with the reorder that, and even create duplicate rows or columns. You can also use a sort that to kind of sort data to your own liking. And then there's also a merge that, so which you can use to merge multiple tables together. And the evaluate that is actually something really powerful. We can use the evaluate that to change cells of incoming data using either string editing or math expressions to evaluate the data that we have. And then there's also an XML dat, which can parse XML data from, for example, a web that gets web data, like just normal HTML data, and then parse it out into XML format. So now that we know how to work with our data in TouchDesigner, actually, there's one thing. In TouchDesigner, when you're using data, this viewer is rendering all the time. So if you have a lot of data, TouchDesigner might become really slow and start dropping frames, and it might become really hard to work with data in TouchDesigner. So it's going to be completely fine once you turn off the viewer of the operator, and you will definitely be able to use very huge data sets as well, but you might not be able to look at them and edit them in TouchDesigner as well, since it's just too much data that is rendering. So in that case, maybe you want to use Excel or another program to prepare your data beforehand before you start using it in TouchDesigner. So Now that we know how to encode our data, sorry, my cat is making some noise right now. So now that we know how to encode our data, we need to visually represent it as well. So there's a few things we can use to visually represent our data or encode our data. First of all, there's size. So size is like probably the most commonly used visual representation for data, because it's very easy for the human eye to differentiate between two objects, and we can very quickly judge different sizes. So it's very easy to understand size, especially when you're using numbers. Most of the time when you look at numbers, especially really huge numbers like these, which you can see right here, you will probably not have a feeling for these numbers, like, okay, how much is that really? So representing them with size can be really helpful, gauging how big these numbers actually are. And then next we have color. Color is a fantastic representation method for enormous data sets. So if you have a large amount of data, because we can identify many shades of color, and so this makes color like a really great choice for representing big picture trends or maybe weather maps, for example. It's also commonly used in identifying patterns and anomalies in large data sets. In this example, this is the Codex Atlanticus. Which is also a really cool project that you can maybe check out later. In this case, they used color to organize topics in the Codex Atlanticus. So green is geometry and algebra. Orange is, for example, physics and nature science. And then this kind of burnt orange is about tools and machines. Blue is about architecture and applied arts, and red is about human science. And then we can also use location presentation methods. They're especially useful if your audience is familiar with the place that is shown. It also helps kind of draw emotional familiarity. So maybe somebody who lives in Manhattan will be like, oh yeah, they can attribute their like own personal experiences to this data that is being shown, and definitely other places as well. And then there's also networks, which are a great presentation method for showing relations between different data points, how they work together. But this can be a little bit difficult to view if there's too many relations between these data points. Then it will probably just become a really messy glob of lines and points. So be careful about that. And then we also have time. Of course, we can use traditional visualizations of time, like a timeline, but we can also use animation nowadays to show change in data over time. So this is an artwork by the artist Aaron Coblin called Flight Patterns. And these are actually videos. So let me show you a video of one of his projects. The quality is not that great of this video, but I hope you can understand what I mean when saying using time for animation. So yeah, we know how to find our data. We know how to work with our data. We know how to visually encode our data. Now we have to visualize it in TouchDesigner itself. There's two techniques in TouchDesigner that you will probably use a lot when working with sorry.
I wanted to embrace
YouTube autoplay interrupted me. Yeah, so there's probably two techniques that you will use a lot when working with data, when creating data visualizations in TouchDesigner. One being instancing. Probably if you use TouchDesigner, you all know what instancing is, but maybe somebody who hasn't used TD a lot will watch this workshop, so I might explain it a little bit. In real-time computer graphics, geometry instancing is the practice of rendering multiple objects of the same mesh in a scene at once. So this technique is primarily used for objects such as trees, grass, or buildings, which can be represented as repeated geometry without appearing repetitive, but it may be also be used for repetitive objects. And in TouchDesigner, we can use the geometry comp. The geometry comp has an instancing parameter page, and we can use it to copy our sub input and make multiple instances of our sub input. And then we can use a very wide range of data. We can use chopped channels, we can use tables, we can use pixels of images, and even subpoints to create instances and also influence these instances. And then also the second one is the replicator comp. So the replicator comp will use a master component or operator, and it will duplicate this operator multiple times depending on the rows of a table. So this is a very helpful technique when creating large data visualizations and not wanting to create everything by hand. We can just code the overall structure once in maybe a component in a container comp, and then just duplicate this container comp multiple times according to the data in our table.